See, I think it is time now for a prospect profile. We're not gonna we kicked around the idea of doing some free agency profiles and that sort of thing, but we just wanted to keep this more of a draft heavy show again because of the combine. So we're only going to do one draft prospect profile, and the reason why we decided on this young man is because number one, he is a specimen and his tape is really good, but the Bengals have shown interest in him. They've done a visit with him, and he could be in play at number 10. And that is the guy who is on our episode picture, Mr. Sonny Styles of Ohio State. And just, I think he, when he was taking the podium, granted, these are like short little blurbs and that sort of thing, but I think he presented himself pretty well for the short time he was at the podium and answering questions. And the one thing, and we'll talk about stuff, and we've got some just a couple of clips to look at and that sort of thing. But the one thing that really sticks out, John, again, is just the leadership and a guy who just seems to value working hard, being he used the word showing up every day and consistency and that sort of thing. And that's really more or less what you see out of this guy. Rangy for his size, and we'll go more into it, but just from the beginning here, I like this guy a lot.
I do too. Very clearly and obviously the best pure linebacker in this class. I think there's a debate with Arvil Reese and like what position he's actually going to play. I think he ended up measuring in at basically like what you expected a linebacker to do. So Arvil Reese may end up being the first like official linebacker taken, but I think in terms of just like there's no projection with who Sonny Styles is. There's no question about what he does well, and I think the data supports him as a clear first round pick. And when you're talking about a linebacker and like how good you have to be worth the 10th overall pick, because you're going to get paid a ton for that position specifically. I do think that the red flags with him are basically very minimal. Like there are some lapses on tape here and there about physicality, and I think being 6'5" and upright like that, that can get him into some trouble sometimes. But I think both in coverage and also lining up on the defensive line from time to time. He has like 300 or something career defensive line snaps. And again, if you're talking about a linebacker that can do more of what the Bengals wanted Demetrius Knight to do last year, with definitely has a much bit more forgiving frame and obviously length to handle those types of assignments, and also being able to rush the passer. I think his overall pressure rate is in about the 70th percentile in terms of recent linebackers who have declared recently. So a guy who can get after the passer, a guy who can line up in multiple spots and get in the passing lane, and just a freak athlete at that size too. So all those qualities that you would love in a first round linebacker if you're going to take that position in that round.
Yeah, and it's funny when you talk, about he did this pretty well. He did this pretty well, and some people are saying, well, I can't justify an off-ball linebacker with number 10 overall. I mean, he just his stats show he just does a little bit of everything. And so we are going to share this video here just to go over his stats and a couple of plays. Let me share it with you all really quick. And here we go. So Sonny Styles, a senior from Ohio State, obviously national champion in 24 with the, coming through the 26 draft. He's 6'5", 245, like we said, or 244, I think is what he weighed in at. He's 21. He turns 22 in November. He is a senior. I believe he went to Pickerington High School, I think, in Ohio. So I think that's we'll call that his hometown, even if it's somewhere nearby. But a guy who really, at least from high level stats, had big numbers in 24, dipped a little bit last year, 244 tackles, 82 of those total tackles last year, 22 and a half tackles for loss in his career, 6.5 last year, 9 total sacks in his career, 1 last year, 9 passes defended, 3 last year, 1 interception that was last year, and then 3 forced fumbles, 1 of those last year as well. Some of the other things, he's appears to be a high level athlete, big and rangy. He has solid instincts. He was a former safety. The first 2 years, he was a safety at Ohio State, national champion leader. I put question mark around, okay, like you talk about forced fumbles, interceptions. He's not getting like 3 of those a year, and so that's a little bit of what happens there. And then the overall surrounding talent, what happens if he goes to a unit. Here he is picking the ball off, nice play off the ricochet. This one's awesome. He sees the quarterback. This is him coming off and stopping him right at the 1 line. And then here he is plugging the hole there, right in the middle of everything. There are some stuff where he gets tackles, and he's more of kind of, there are plays where he kind of rallies, and other people are kind of starting to make the tackle, and then he kind of gets some help, or he provides the reinforcement. Whatever you make of that as a positive or a negative. Here he is out in space. Love that. And then here he is blitzing the quarterback. One more nice run stuff right here. Just comes right in through the gap and makes the play. So again, just there's a lot to like in this in the tape. Here's the thing in terms of 24 to 25, John. This may be one of those things that people look at. 100 total tackles in 24, 82 last year. 10.5 tackles for loss in 24, 6.5 last year, or this last year. 6 sacks in 24, 1 this year. Now, he played in 2 less games for Ohio State this year as he did with the national championship team. But there's some of those high level stats are, they took a drop this year. Now, I want to bring up something I think you mentioned. I'm pretty sure it was you a few episodes ago when we started kind of mentioning some of these guys, and that is the missed tackle rate. I think he was at about 18% per my research. You got me looking into that. I think it was at about 17, 18% in 24, and that dropped depending on who you ask. He basically had 1 or 2 missed tackles last year in all, basically a 2% missed tackle rate by some outlets. So that, if you want to talk about stats dipping from year to year, that missed tackle rate, and again, kudos to you for bringing that up. That is, again, that's an under the surface level statistic, but that is something that you go, wow, that's a big cleanup.
100%. It is a stat that kind of fluctuates up and down, but you definitely want to be on the brighter side of that when you're entering the NFL draft and coming off of your most recent tape. But yeah, like again, someone who has been in the secondary before, like you said, a former safety, someone who's played along the defensive line, settled in at linebacker, obviously, like just the size, the movement ability in space, it's all there. And it, like, you need linebackers at this point in this day and age to be able to drop back, get in the passing lanes, and also be able to come downhill and whenever you're in a heavy box. And yeah, like I don't see a lot wrong with Sonny Styles. And compared to last year, like the top linebacker was Jahad Campbell, and he had these injury concerns. That's what made him drop all the way to the end of the first round. I don't think you get that with Sonny Styles as well. So yeah, like it's a similar argument as with Caleb Downs, because again, both these guys play positions in which like the value, you may question it in like a normal draft, but because this draft is lacking a lot of elite talents at the top, I think that raises Sonny's stock a little bit. And that's why you see him mocked as high as maybe the Giants in 5th overall. So like, I do think that he will be in the conversation with the Bengals 10th overall pick. I know Paul Daniel Jr. mocked him in like the Athletic Writers Beat mock draft. I know like teams like the Buccaneers would probably like to trade up for him as well, maybe to replace Levante David. So I think his range of outcomes is very wide. But I also think, Anthony, like specifically for the Bengals, and I don't know if we want to take the conversation here just yet, but the one thing I think about in relation to Downs is like linebacker is just one of these positions that it is so tough to count on rookies to contribute immediately. And the Bengals saw that firsthand last year with both Barrett Carter and Demetrius Knight. I think Sonny Styles is clearly a better prospect compared to those two. And you have more confidence in him playing well. But for a team that like needs its defense to be better now, and investing this pick in a linebacker, I do think that's where like the sort of risk comes into play, like expecting a little bit too much from him early on at a position that it is really tough to translate immediately from college to the pros. So maybe if the Bengals had more stability around him, I'd be like a little bit more comfortable with the pick. But just looking at the players specifically without all the other context, like I don't see anything wrong with Styles as a prospect. And I think the 10th overall pick is probably like the range in which you could feel comfortable at the earliest to taking a chance on that.
That's a fantastic point, because you brought up earlier about when we were talking about Jordan Battle and how the Bengals may just not want to have a two starting safeties supplanted. And again, Battle has had some really nice moments and games with the Bengals too, but it just, you don't want to do that. They did that last year at linebacker, and it was rough for most of the season. And now you're talking about, okay, let's say there's a learning curve, or I don't, hopefully not similar for Styles as we saw from the two rookies last year, but let's just say there's a learning curve and some stumbling blocks. Well, like you said, the guys who will be surrounding him in that position group or working with him in that position group, those aren't 5-year vets. Those aren't, one Pro Bowler and one really solid guy. They could be down the road, but these are guys still finding their footing in the second season. And then you bring in another rookie. It's almost a little bit kind of like what you were talking about with the safeties and not wanting to move on from both guys, or have this, massive overhaul in a span of, one calendar year, 2 drafts, but 1 calendar year in one position group. I don't know. I don't know how much that dictates what the Bengals weigh into that, or if you just say, these guys are off the board. Styles is a hell of a football player. We're going to make it work.
Also, Sonny Styles was the 5-star recruit coming out of college. He's going to be 21 years old, and he played at obviously a major program. That is almost like a cheat code for predicting who the Bengals end up targeting in the draft. For whatever reason, it's really just been like a Zach Taylor era type of situation. But like Caleb Downs also fits that bill. Francis Mauaga, I don't think I'm pronouncing the name correctly, out of Miami, the offensive tackle. He's another guy who kind of fits that description. So it makes sense why the Bengals are interested in Styles. Right now, linebacker is still a major need. It may not work out in the free agency where they get a guy like Leo Chenal or Demario Davis, and they still need it. We know that the Bengals are typically just entering the draft with at least one dire need that it's like almost pigeonholed for a draft pick, but I think they could do a lot worse than Sonny Styles for sure.
Yeah, I think despite the circumstances, there may be risks, like you said, but I think as a player, he's a safe player in terms of his ceiling and floor and all that kind of stuff. And that's why I'm almost a little bit thinking that we mentioned the same thing about Downs, that he's probably not only one of the most talented players, but probably one of the safest can't miss guys in this class. It wouldn't surprise me if those two guys are really high up on the Bengals draft board, if not towards the top, just because, the risk factor comparative to a Peter Woods, comparative to Kendrick Falk, comparative to, Caleb Banks and that sort of thing. It just, these are the guys that just say, hey, while it may be rough a little bit at first, we think that their on-ramp to the NFL is going to be pretty easy, and, they're safe prospects. So, that's kind of the takeaway I got from both of those guys. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Bengals have those two OSU guys towards the top of their list.
And that's ultimately why, like, that's what you need to look at when you're just talking about just drafting a player. Like, it's never about just like how he's going to look as a rookie, right? I think we sometimes get caught up in that. I certainly get caught up in that. But these are discussions that you have after you go through the process of like, okay, is this guy worth the pick? Does he check all the boxes? And then you start to have those, you start splitting hairs about like, is this pick worth it, or is this position over this position? I think at the end of the day, though, both Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles, if we have a wheel that we do like sometime in April about like who the best players of the draft are, they're going to be on that wheel for sure.
Yeah. But we'll